imagine if there's a warning poster of a pathogen, this really bad looking pathogen that we don't want our animals to be affected by. What if you could show the immune system a warning like, oh, look, this bad guy is going to come in to this environment and you have to be ready? How much more ready would the immunity or the immune cells be if they had this warning? Now, that's exactly what it is. So this beta-glucan looks like something that is alarming and basically trains the immunity to have a stronger and faster response when the real culprit enters the environment.
Welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast, powered by Wisenetics, your trusted source for the cutting-edge science and insights driving the global pet food industry forward. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Shevler. I'm a professor of companion animal nutrition at the University of Guelph, and I have a background in comparative and animal nutrition and 2 decades of experience working alongside industry partners. I focus on turning rigorous science into real-world applications that improve health and advance product innovation. Whether you're a nutritionist, product developer, marketer, veterinarian, or decision maker in the pet food space, this podcast is your go-to for staying competitive and informed. From emerging research and regulatory shifts to ingredient innovation and sustainability trends, we cover what matters. So let's dive into today's episode and explore how science is shaping the future of pet food. On today's podcast, we have Jeanine De Nysschen, Global Product Manager at Fibosel in Trouw Nutrition. Today, we're going to discuss beta-glucans. Welcome, Jeanine.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. Very excited to be here today.
Well, thanks. I always like to give my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves and the journey that got them to where they are today. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Okay, I'll start off taking it back to where it all started. Basically, I was born and raised in South Africa, and I've always had an interest in, let's say, animals and science, and I grew up wanting to be a veterinarian. Now, things changed along the way, the route adjusted, and I became an animal nutritionist instead, or an animal scientist. So I studied animal science, and I also did my master's in South Africa. And I started off or kicked off my career there as well. Always been interested in taking scientific concepts, understanding it, so going for the deep dive, and then making it more simple and practical. So I very quickly became more commercially focused, but also have that technical background. So basically that led to me becoming a global product manager. So I relocated in 2021 to the Netherlands, and I started working there as a product manager, global product manager for feed additives. So mainly as focused on reproductive or production animals, let's say. But that, of course, all these ingredients expand to pets as well. So a lot of experience in different species, different animals, different feed additives, different specialty ingredients. So I'm a bit of a chameleon when it comes to animal nutrition and feed additives, but I'm really, really passionate about health and immunity, gut health, all of these, let's say, more modern topics when it comes to animal nutrition.
At Trouw Nutrition, we blend our passion for customer success with our love for pet nutrition, bringing together the art and science of nutrition, ingredients, and blending. We're here to dream with you and help you create standout products. We're here to deliver for you with dry ingredient, premixes, base blends, and specialty blends. And we're 100% dedicated to you with a complete focus on pet nutrition. See what Trouw can do for you at TrowNutritionPets.com.
Well, I think that is a really good foundation for today's discussion on beta-glucans. So let's get right into it. Maybe we should start with just setting the stage with a definition. What are beta-glucans, and why should we care about them for pet nutrition?
Okay, so beta-glucans are components called polysaccharides of cell walls. And these can be cell walls of algae, bacteria, cereal, fungi, and yeasts. Now, yeasts are especially important for what we're talking about today, but these components are part of the cell walls, and these are ingredients that basically affect immunity. So they act on the innate immunity. But coming back to the structure, the type of beta-glucan basically depicts the structure. So depending on the source, whether it's bacterial, fungal, yeast, cereal, that basically depicts the structure. It could be linear, it could be two-dimensional, it could be three-dimensional. And that also links to this branching that we'll talk about. It's the beta 1316 branching, for example, that's the yeast type of beta-glucan. Now, the structure is important because that also indicates to us who want to use them as part of pet food what effect they will have in the animal, because that basically depicts the bioavailability or the way that it acts, the mode of action of these ingredients. And depending on the structure, we will see, for example, for the yeast-derived, because that's what we'll be focusing on today, they have especially an effect on the immunity or the immune cells. And some other sources have, for example, an effect in the gut health space, or more systemic. You even see some things like obesity or insulin resistance. So it depends a bit on the structure, and that basically plays into why we would include them into pet nutrition or pet diets.
Okay, so building on that just a little bit, what is the structure of beta-glucans that differ between, for example, yeast beta-glucans, mushroom beta-glucans, and oat and barley beta-glucans?
Okay, so basically we can look at it in a very visual way. So we don't have a picture here today, but I'm going to explain it as best as I can. But basically we have a backbone. So these are glucose units that are basically forming a linear plane, so a linear bone, a chain of units, and attached to this chain, we could or may not have different branches. So we have the branching on top of this chain. So depending on the source, for example, bacterial has a very structured, very linear structure. So a very linear 1,3 glucan structure. If we go into the cereal structure, it's a bit more complex. So it's linear, still linear, but it has some depth because it's got this beta 1,4 glucan connection there. When you go into the bit more complex types like fungal, you see the branches. So it's basically the linear flat line, and then you see these branches lying on top of this chain. And these branches are short when you're talking about fungal beta-glucans. Moving into the yeast space, and I'm flowing deliberately from more or less complex to the most complex. So yeast has this long chain. So it's basically the chain, and the branches are really long attached to this chain. And we call this the beta 1,6 branches. These are complex. They are basically giving us this 3D structure. And this 3D structure is important because it acts like the key and lock system. You need a specific key to unlock a specific, in this case, response on the immunity cells. So this complexity gives it its effectiveness in, let's say, boosting immunity or triggering an immune response. And that's how we have these differences from simple to complex. And when you talk about immunity, it's important to know that you need the branching, you need the 3D structure, and these linear ones, they don't really have an effect on the immunity cells.
So let's dive a little bit more into the mechanism to enhance immunity. Can you explain why they use derived beta-glucans and how they stimulate the immune system?
Now I'll go into my two favorite acronyms when I talk about this topic. And the first one is PAMPs, so pathogen-associated molecular patterns, sorry. And these PAMPs means that beta-glucans, it's a molecular pattern. We just talked about the structure. So this pattern is basically associated with a pathogen. So that means that the immunity cell or the immune system basically recognizes it as a danger signal. I like to refer to it as a sort of a warning poster. Imagine if there's a warning poster of a pathogen, this really bad looking pathogen that we don't want our animals to be affected by. What if you could show the immune system a warning like, oh, look, this bad guy is going to come in to this environment and you have to be ready? How much more ready would the immunity or the immune cells be if they had this warning? Now, that's exactly what it is. So this beta-glucan looks like something that is alarming and basically trains the immunity to have a stronger and faster response when the real culprit enters the environment. And by culprit, that could be many different things, but that's a really nice way to simplify the context of this. And then the other acronym, because I said there's two, is pattern recognition receptor, so PRR. So basically, on these cells that are playing an integral part in immunity, they have certain receptors. Now, these receptors are basically found on macrophages, dendritic cells, neutrophils. These are all important components of the immune system and the response that we need to combat challenges. So these receptors are there, and these pathogen associated molecular patterns basically bind these receptors. And when they bind, they elicit a response. And they basically begin the chain of reactions that lead us to warn the system, prepare the system for things that are bound to happen anyway, because we live in a very stressful modern world. And I say we because not only us, but our animals as well. A lot of challenges. Of course, that's a very, very easy concept to grasp if you think about other species, but even in companion animals, it's relevant. So that's my two favorite acronyms when I like to explain the story about how it works. So I hope that it's a nice way for you to remember it.
Yes, I'm very much enjoying the way in which you're describing these differences. You're making it very visual, so I appreciate that a lot. I hope our listeners do too. So diving into the base yeast beta-glucans, because there's a myriad of yeasts on the market, from yeast probiotics to yeast extracts, what makes Fibosel's yeast beta-glucans so different from other yeast-derived products on the market?
Okay, so I can spend a lot of time on this question, but I'll try and keep it as simple and straightforward as possible, but also focus on the most important parts for today. Now, not all beta-glucans are the same. Like we said, there are different sources. But if you think about just yeast beta-glucans, even there we have differences. If you think about the common yeast-derived beta-glucans that we have, it's from the species Saccharomyces cerevisiae. But that's just the species. Within the species, we even have many different strains. And you have to grow the strain. And this strain is basically undergoing a lot of, it's put in a space where there is an environment. So the strain develops based on the growth environment. So can you see how the growth environment plays a role on the strain? The strain will then produce different lengths or thicknesses of different parts of the yeast. And we're only interested, when you look at beta-glucans, at a certain part of the yeast. So the yeast has layers, the outer layer, so the cell membrane, and the inside. Now, beta-glucans are locked inside the yeast cell wall. So then you have products that are basically yeast cell walls. You have products that are basically the parts inside yeast. So yeast cell walls already, there's a lot of differences. You have the outer layer, the moss products, the mannan oligosaccharide products. Now, that means that basically there's not a lot of processing that went on before you get this this ingredient that you want to use. And they have a certain mode of action, which is most often not really focusing on the immunity. Beta-glucans are interlocked between layers. So you have to extract beta-glucans. Now, when it comes to extraction, there's also different methods. You get, let's call it processing, right? You have the very harsh chemical processing when you get really pure products. So you'll see, for example, a beta-glucan value, a concentration of between 60 to 85% when you look at a label of such a product. So high purity. So there's a lot in terms of percentage. But then you always have to question, okay, what does that mean? Because processing may have some effects on the structural integrity. If you have a really harsh process, it may lead to a bit of a structural issue, right? So yes, there's a lot in terms of percentage, but that doesn't mean that they're all still intact or that they're really bioactive or that they will elicit exactly the same response each time. And that means when specifically what is important in terms of processing, you have what we have. We use when we process Fibosel, we have an enzymatic extraction process. So it's a natural enzymatic extraction process. It's more gentle. It really protects the integrity of the structure. And like I said before, it's really a lock and key mechanism. So think about the key. If the key is slightly damaged, you'll probably have an issue unlocking that lock. Or if it's smaller or bigger because some parts are left there, that also basically has an effect on the bioactivity or the mode of action, this triggering response that we're looking for. Yeast products, then you have different parts inside the yeast, the membrane, the inside, then you have the extraction method, how is it extracted? So always ask these questions when you want to compare products. Don't ever just look at a percentage on a label because that really doesn't give you the full picture. That usually is something that we need in order to make sure that we have batch per batch equality so that we actually meet the standards batch to batch. Sure, let's check that, let's be sure. But just try and understand, what does this processing mean? What's the effect that it has on the beta-glucan and on the bioavailability of this molecule? Because all of this is very important. We are looking at animals and looking at natural processes. The less natural, usually, I think rule of thumb is the more questionable the effect in this natural environment. So think about processing, think about source, think about not only percentages on the label.
Well, I think that dovetails nicely into my next question, which is, now that we have an understanding of how beta-glucans from Fibosel are different than other competitors, have you fed it to dogs and cats? And what have you looked for in terms of outcomes?
There's a strong foundation of evidence showing how exposed beta-glucans or beta-glucans in general, but especially the beta-1,3, 1,6 types that I mentioned, how they activate immune cells and improve resilience across species. The mechanism is there. We understand the science behind it. There's a lot of information also based on other products about how that affects animal health, and it could be linked to gut health. But this beta-glucan that we're looking at, and especially the beta-1,6 one, is basically looking at the immune response, right? So you'll see increased in vaccine responses. For example, in puppies, there's some studies about that. So improving the vaccine response of certain vaccines. So especially young animals and old animals or immunosuppressed animals, you'll see a really nice response there, supporting immunity. I did see a lot of things regarding osteoarthritis as well. So there's a link between that in dogs. I also found some studies about inflammatory bowel disease, for example. So beta-glucans have shown an improvement in that aspect. So really supporting the immune system and enhancing this mechanism. Basically, all these challenges that we that we know we are going to face, there's a way to make animals more resilient, and the immunity plays a key role in all of these mechanisms, basically. So the mechanism is clear. It's activating receptors. So the dectin-1 receptors, it basically stimulates the cytokine production, so giving the warning signal, getting the body ready to to have a response against these pathogen challenges. Like I said, while pet-specific studies are still in progress, this biology is consistent and relevant for companion animals too. And of course, there's a big research literature out there. We can really just plug in and play. And then once you understand that this basis is established, and you know that there's a lot of different products that can basically support you with this, you need to understand what the differences are. Because if you are targeting immunity, you need to understand which structure you need, which source you need in order to really have this response.
Okay, so because Fibosel is available for the pet food industry, can you talk a little bit about how you use Fibosel during the extrusion and canning process, and whether it needs to be handled differently than anything else in our ingredient stream?
So I can say for Fibosel, it's okay to use in all the pet food processing and all these type of systems in pet food. You can also use it in the coating, the afterwards, the oil coating. You can also use it there. It's also compatible with other ingredients, so even like the acidic, like lowering pH. That's perhaps more of in other species applicable. But if you have, for example, organic acids, it's also compatible with that. So very, very resilient. There's no red flags. For example, I'm not going to tell you, oh yeah, you can use it except for here and there and there. There are no red flags. Of course, you always have to check and ask the supplier for the documentation and proof that it's tested. And we have a lot of that, so that's good.
Fantastic. Well, if there are other business-to-business partners, we'll let them work on that with you as their collaborator in their product innovation. So maybe one more specific animal-based question, though, is would you advise to do incremental increases in yeast? So when we think about feeding it to dogs and cats, what would you suggest feeding basically depends on when an animal is in a stressful period or before a stressful period, or should it be all the time?
So yeast beta-glucans in general can be applied in all phases, in all life stages. So that's the short answer. But then, of course, you can also amplify that in for example, the vulnerable phases, or where we know, like puppies or seniors or immunosuppressed animals. You can obviously target those with, for example, an immunity treat or something like that. And then you can also play around with dose, perhaps at a higher dose. Yeah, supplement in that way could mean you achieve a higher dose, right? So in general, yeast beta-glucans, especially this beta-1316 ones, can be applied across the board. And I also like to link that with an example, because immunity, when we undergo stress, for example, what's the first thing that happens to us? We get a cold and a flu. Our immune system is down. So stress has a really direct negative effect on immunity. And if you think about our companion animals today, they are undergoing stress. It sounds a bit strange, but think about the guy, the DHL guy, or whatever system UPS guy. ringing the bell or someone knocking at the door or all the sounds in the street, those things actually do trigger a bit of stress in our animals. And we forget that they are historically not supposed to listen to our doorbells every day and all day and bark at the guy walking in the street or the postman, or be chased around by our children's in the garden. So I think maybe I'm generalizing, but we need to understand that stress is there. It's going to happen because these animals do come from maybe, let's say, a more relaxed history before we took them and cuddled them on the couch 24/7. So stress in general has a negative effect on immunity. So you can always have something in the diet to support that. We also have certain breeds that are bred for certain work. So work dogs, for example, it's really stressful for a work dog not to work. That's stress. And we are sitting in 9-to-5 jobs. We cannot take them out for walks. Just waiting for a walk. I'm sure that my dog stresses while she's waiting for her next walk. So yeah, the point I want to make is yes, of course, you can have a targeted approach, young animals, or even if you think about the relay to the immunity antibodies. Think about supplementing the mother to get the antibodies through the milk to the puppies, for example. That's a targeted approach, and that can be very specific. But in general, I wouldn't say that it's a bad idea to include it across the board.
And last but not least, what do you see the role of functional ingredients like Fibosel evolving to in the pet food industry? How do you think about this journey? And I think it's quite clear that functional ingredients are seeing a huge rise. But what do you see the future of functional ingredients as?
So I think it's a really exciting momentum in pet nutrition. For a long time, formulation has focused on meeting the basics: protein, energy, vitamins, minerals. But today, pet parents expect more, I would say. They want nutrition that actively supports health and resilience. Functional ingredients like Fibosel allows us to take a proactive approach, using nutrition not just to feed, but to help maintain immune balance and well-being. We're also looking at a holistic approach, right? So at the gut, immune, brain axis, how immunity, digestion, and behavior, how they are all connected. So I see beta-glucans becoming a core part of the toolbox of natural evidence-based solutions supporting pets through all life stages, from puppies to seniors. And for me, as both a scientist and a dog owner, it's rewarding to see science translate into better and happier animals. We talk about longevity and sustainability, and I think all pet owners would want to know that we are adding things to the diets of our animals that actually help with longevity, so increasing their lives, making them more happy, less visits to the vet, although the vets are very nice. And yeah, I would say in general, there's a lot that we can do in terms of longevity and being more proactive. Let's not wait for things to go wrong. Let's add the ingredients that we know are beneficial and that could help our animals live long, happy lives.
It's time for our famous three.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today to talk about Fibosel and beta-glucans. And just a few more questions for you that are not beta-glucan related. So the first is, how many dogs and cats do you have?
I have 2 dogs, and they are also South African. So when we relocated, we took them with us. It was really a no-brainer for us because they're part of the family, right? And in retrospect, like looking back at it, I cannot imagine going through relocation, not having them there. And of course, I left a lot of people in South Africa. I left parents, siblings, friends there. But nothing worked as well as like having that pet there that just sees everything, hears everything, knows when you're stressed or knows when you're lonely, and just lies next to you on the couch, and just you can cuddle up and shed a tear, and they are always there, never judging, always there. So very, very important for those stressful moments in our lives.
That description brings me to my second question, which is, do they hate the rain in the Netherlands?
Actually, no, they don't. And they also love snow. It doesn't snow a lot, but when it does, they are super excited. They really just want to be outside. They literally don't understand the discomfort of weather. And we come from a country where if the weather's bad, we stay indoors. We just say, oh, it's not now, it's later, I'll just wait for it to pass. Now, if you know anything about the Dutch, they have this saying that translates to, we are not made of sugar, or something like that. So basically that means whether it rains, snows, whether there's a storm, they're on their bicycles, they're out. They just put the right gear on and they're out the door. And my dogs have the same approach. So it's like they've already integrated into the Dutch system. They really just want to be outdoors all the time, as much as possible. And that really forces you to go for your mental health walks more frequently.
Fantastic. I agree. I spent a year in the Netherlands and I agree with you. They just keep going.
Yeah.
And my last question, what do you think the greatest source of beta-glucans in your diet is?
Good question. At the moment, I make a lot of oats. So I would say oats is perhaps a source. It's not the best type if you think about the whole story I just had about structure, so maybe I should readjust. But I make a lot of oats porridge for my baby, and actually I also used that in his bath water because it's got a really nice anti-inflammatory effect when he had chicken pox. So in that essence, there's a lot of practical uses, but I should expand my sources. I would say I should look for more yeast. I do have a little ingredient in my cupboard that is basically a yeast ingredient that you add to food, but I still don't understand when to use it. I think you add it into pasta sauces or something, but I must say I forget about it.
Marmite or something like that gives a good umami taste.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I just forget to use it, but I do. I saw it in the shelves, and I was like, of course I have to have this. It would be, I would be doing myself a dishonor if I don't take this product. I took it, but I just don't remember to use it.
Excellent. I love how you're living and breathing beta-glucans. Well, thank you for joining us once again.
It's a pleasure.
That concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented by Wisenetics. Thank you for joining us today. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review for your feedback because it is invaluable. Until next time, this is Dr. Kate Shevler signing off from the Pet Food Science Podcast.